Cool fact, a crocodile can't stick out its tongue. Also, you can get health insurance for a month or just under a year in some states. United Healthcare short-term insurance plans, underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage for you. Learn more at uh1.com.
Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Since 2013, Bombas has donated over 100 million socks, underwear, and T-shirts to those facing homelessness. If we counted those on air, this ad would last over 1,157 days. But if we counted the time it takes to make a donation possible, it would take just a few clicks. Because every time you make a purchase, Bombas donates an item to someone who needs it.
Go to bombas.com/ACAST and use code ACAST for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/ACAST, code ACAST.
Hello and welcome to the Napoleonicist. Today we're going to be looking at a vitally important aspect of Napoleon's success and one of his most impressive traits as a commander, his ability to motivate and inspire those under his command. I am very fortunate today to be joined by Malia Ogawa, a teacher, writer and self-proclaimed historian, currently living abroad in Japan. She originally hails from Seattle, Washington in the US, but has also lived abroad in Paris and London, where she got her MA in modern history at King's College London. She did an undergrad thesis on the Japanese-American experience during World War II, and her MA dissertation on, significantly for us on the Napoleonicist, Napoleon, his soldiers, and the construction of Napoleonic military culture. Malia, how have you been?
Good. It's nighttime here and it's cold.
Absolutely. Well, welcome to the Napoleonicist. It's great to have a new face from the repertoire. Let's start with the basics. In a kind of a nod back to Napoleon Month in November, just kind of briefly outline for people what your view is on Napoleon the man, first of all.
Okay, so the first time I found out about Napoleon was when I was 16. And I was taking AP European history. AP is advanced placement. It's college credit for high school to university. And I was like, this guy is super cool. He just rose up and was like, I'm gonna take over Europe. And he did, basically. So that was kind of what made me really interested in him. I always thought Louis XIV was interesting too, because he was an absolute monarch. So I think kind of absolutism is interesting to me. And then as I've studied him more and more, I find him just like really interesting. I have a book of his love letters to Josephine, and he was like so passionate, very emotional. In my notes here, I wrote down one of the quotes that he has in his letters that always kind of stuck with me. And it was, Je me réveille plein de toi. It's like, I woke up filled with you. I was like, wow, that's super passionate, really emotional. He was really smart. I always admire intelligent people. And I like the way that he rose up through the ranks. His family was, minor aristocracy, but they weren't rich. He was from Corsica. He was an outsider. Maybe it's the American in me or the millennial, but the whole like earning his stripes by just being awesome instead of my position and my family and stuff like that. I thought that was really cool. And then just how he was able to kind of take over everything and be like, yo, I'm the emperor now. I don't know, I liked that.
Fair enough. I kind of feel we should have had you on for Napoleon. I think you and Luke Daly Groves would have gotten incredibly well. Perhaps less so with Marcus, because as is well known, he's a Napoleon skeptic. Now, Napoleon, he's famous for his kind of incredible ability when it came to his rhetoric, either in person or in his propaganda. What in your research did you find to be unique about his way of doing, propaganda, if you like, whether it's verbally or through print culture?
Okay, so this is going to be my longest answer. I've just a disclaimer. I wrote my dissertation 4 or 5 years ago, and all of my research is at home in Seattle. So I've only had my actual dissertation to look at to answer all of this. So just a disclaimer in case there's something I can't answer. So something that was unique about his style, I found, was how much he praised his men. Kind of reminded me of the everyone gets a trophy trope of being a millennial. So everyone's special. But most of the soldiers probably didn't live very long after, so they didn't develop the same millennial complexes. He talks about like the blood of the French, their superiority. That reminded me of Japan during World War II, and Japan now a little bit. He was super dramatic. I'm very dramatic myself. It's probably because I'm American. I don't know. He used repetition a lot, and I have some notes written down that I'm just gonna read if that's cool. It's about his written propaganda and also like his speaking. So he used active voice, and he had a very comprehensive yet forceful tone that was consistently patriotic and positive. This reminded me a bit of Trump, who I hate and didn't vote for. But some of the people, some of the Japanese students I have, they say he speaks so easily for us to understand. And Napoleon did that too. His prose could be easily understood by the public, except he spoke in full sentences and used real grammar. And he glorified the actions of his soldiers and himself by using a lot of hyperbole and descriptive style. He delivered his speeches with so much passion and dramatic flair to promote a strong sense of military values and motivation within his men, as well as reinforce their morale with inspiring visions of honor and glory. So there were a few keywords that he always repeated that held just all this emotional power to magnify battles with a sense of heroic military glory, patriotic sentiment, or even to assure soldiers of their own self-worth. Like, you guys did a really good job. So let's see, some of the words he used the most enduring and potent words, as I said in my dissertation, I'm quoting myself, is digne, if I said that okay, worthy, oser, to dare. Okay, this word's a bit tricky for a non-French native to say. L'orgueil, pride, and l'épopée, epic. I also noticed he used patrie, which is like patriotism, homeland, sang, which is blood, and gloire, a lot, glory. One of his most consistent expressions of praise was "Soldats, je suis content de vous." Like, soldiers, I am happy with you. I'm happy with you. That was really consistent. He focused a lot on soldiers. He spoke about their futures filled with victory, glory, honor, and peace. He used parents as motivation because later on in my dissertation, the conclusion I drew about motivation, aside from all of Napoleon's rhetoric, is that filial love, love for your family, your home, that's what drove them to fight. Because they fought, then they could go home. Everything would be cool again. There would be peace. they could see their fam. It would be really awesome. So I have a quote here by him. It says, La paix de l'Europe, le bonheur de vos parents seront les résultats de votre courage. So the peace of Europe, the happiness of your parents will be a result of your courage. So he tells them stuff like this. He's always talking about how great the French soldiers are. They're so inspiring. You guys are the best soldiers of them all. There's something special about French blood. He also acknowledged their hardships. And he's like, I know that stuff is hard. Me personally, I like it when my leader acknowledges my hardships, so I feel seen as an employee or person. He also acknowledged the accomplishments of his troops, something else that I, as a person, like being acknowledged for. I think most people do. I think he was pretty clever in that his whole motivation was focused on the soldiers. He knew, if I can keep these guys happy and motivated, that's how I'm going to win a lot of my battles. So he praised them a lot. He acknowledged them. He talked about their accomplishments. He had this whole system of merits. That's how he created the Légion d'honneur, the Legion of Honor, which is still France's highest honor you can receive today. And just like how he rose through merit, you could earn it by merit. So you didn't have to be an aristocrat to get that. You had to work hard, accomplish things. You would get that. If you become a member of the Legion of Honor, you get special privileges. I thought it was a bit funny how Napoleon got rid of the Ancien Regime. And well, though he didn't get rid of it, but you know, that French Revolution. It was like, it wasn't there. And then he created his own little court. And he was like, I'm the emperor. It's different than king. I was like, that's kind of badass. That's something I would do. And so these people could be part of the court. So it was slightly hypocritical. I will say it's hypocritical, but I did kind of find it amusing. Let's see. He projected this image of himself as a mythical savior and hero, heroic and illustrious, yet essentially human. That was seen a lot in his print propaganda. He had this huge focus on honor, like I said, merit-based reward system. He gave his men, the different units had les aigles, which are eagles. Everyone had a different eagle. The eagles became objects of worship, and if you did something bad, your eagle is going to be ashamed of you. Stuff like that. Kind of like, I don't know, what's the closest comparison I can think of? Maybe like in Game of Thrones, how they all have houses. I don't know if that's like a super good comparison, but they all have their special house flag, and all of his troops had their special eagles.
When you say that, I mean, recently I was doing an interview for another podcast on Wellington, and I likened his career from 1815 onwards to being like the last season of Game of Thrones, where you've got Waterloo, goes really well, and then everything after that just kind of falls apart a little bit. So I'm with you with the Game of Thrones comparison.
Yeah, and then, you know, the people who know Game of Thrones but don't know history that much, they might understand better. I don't know. Fun fact on the side, King's College London was founded by the Duke of Wellington, and I was handed my diploma by the current one, and I lived right next to Waterloo in Southwark, and a pub for like Lord Nelson was right near my place while I was doing all this research, and I was like, cool. All of his enemies. Yeah, so let's see, do I have anything else to say about this? Okay, something else. He liked to be a man of the people. So he was an expert in soldiers slaying, apparently. There's this one myth, it's probably a myth, that he came across some soldier who was supposed to be guarding something, and the soldier had fallen asleep. So Napoleon decided to stand guard for the soldier, you know, man of the people. I don't know if that is true, because a lot of the sources I read were either secondary or primary sources of soldiers that were super into him. So I didn't come across a lot of criticism of Napoleon, which makes it a bit difficult to be able to say whether he was actually like this or not. I like to think that he very much put on a face like for the men, but I wonder if he was actually like that behind closed doors, you know. Let's see. Oh, I have a little bit of rhetoric for you if you would like to hear it.
Go for it.
Yeah, so at Austerlitz, when he won, it was also the, what's it called, anniversary of when he was crowned emperor. And he says his classic line, Soldat, je suis content de vous. And then he goes on to say, il suffira de dire, j'étais à la bataille d'Austerlitz pour vous, qu'on vous répondre, voilà un brave. So, un brave? Yeah, I think I said that right. Basically, he's saying, soldiers, I'm super happy with you, and blah, 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 blah. It will be sufficient to say, I was at Austerlitz. This is if they're talking to non-soldiers. And those people will respond, wow, here's a brave man. Voilà un brave. Yeah, so he always was pumping them up all the time. When I was doing my research, I had a little book that I got in France, and it was just all of his speeches. Not all, a lot of his speeches. That book's home in Seattle, so I only have the quotes from my dissertation available to me. But I remember reading a lot of them, and I was like, wow, this is pretty good. And I did all of my primary research in French because I thought it would be more authentic. My French is a bit rusty now since I live in a different country that doesn't speak French.
Well, you say that, but I mean, the running joke on the Napoleonicist is that any time I pronounce something in another language, whether it's French, German, Spanish, you name it, I murder the pronunciation. So I think the listeners are just going to be delighted that somebody can actually pronounce French properly on this podcast. It's clearly going to be the first time.
It's easier when I've been drinking, I'll say that. So yeah, I think that's about all I have to say about that. I had a few other things. He had these bulletins, bulletins, that were kind of like a news sheet, and they were basically like a newspaper. People in France could get it. People outside of France would get it. He depicted war as a grand romantic adventure in it. He always called himself emperor or Sa Majesté. What did he say about France? He was talking about how France was like the savior of Europe. France was superior. The French were bringing the revolutionary principles of liberté and égalité, freedom and equality, and its enlightened principles of government to the, get this, more backwards and entrapped populations of their foreign European neighbors. And this was determined by a sense of French cultural superiority. This reminded me of Japan in like 1930s, 1940s so much, because they did that to Korea and China. Yeah, and you know, just Britain to other people, America to other people. Everyone does it at some point or the other, but I found that a bit amusing because so predictable. Yeah. He also kind of lied a bit about battles in his bulletins. They lost, he wouldn't admit that they lost. He would just put out what, I guess the trending word right now is fake news. But I hate using that word. Classic propaganda. Fake news has been around since before the 21st century. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that you pick up on the fake news thing, the reluctance to accept when an individual's been defeated. the ability to kind of speak with a charismatic flair that people really latch onto. A few significant markers with a certain outgoing US president.
Yeah. I guess the big difference is that Napoleon was really positive, and that other guy is not. Napoleon he tried to maintain positivity. We're doing so great. Everything is great. Yeah, I guess he didn't have news printing stuff about him because he controlled everything. So I wonder if it would have gone a bit that way too, if other people were saying stuff.
Yeah, and the other significant thing that you mentioned earlier was that Napoleon was a highly, highly intelligent individual, really on the ball, which you could quite powerfully argue might not be the case with Mr. Trump. But hey, let's not make this political, even though that's exactly what I've just gone and done. You mentioned earlier about the kind of the heroic language. Do you think he had a hero complex? Or is it just kind of arrogance or bluster?
It's hard to say, isn't it? Because definitely yes, from my secondary sources. Could you say that someone who constantly portrays themselves as a hero and man of the people has the hero complex? I feel like if you're always saying that about yourself, even if you don't at the beginning, it's going to develop.
And I was also struck by what you said about how there isn't much criticism. I mean, that's really interesting. Why do you think that's the case? Is it about the kind of the culture around what was and wasn't going to be published in the years after the Napoleonic Wars? Why do we seem to have fewer contemporary sources criticizing Napoleon?
I'm not sure. I feel like the place where we would have found the most criticism would have been in the letters. And I don't know how all of the letters I read in the archives were chosen. So it could have been that people were critical and those letters were destroyed, or it could have been that they were critical but didn't want to write it down. So that's kind of my thought. There's this one guy's memoirs who I read, and he kind of reminded me of myself. I feel like if I had been going to battle, I would have been him. He was walking around Lille before going off to Germany, early 1800s, and he was admiring the architecture and thinking about like the history of that town. He was also kind of pissed that he had to go off to war. He was like, why? And in his bio, he fought in the Imperial Guard, and he went, I think it was either he did go to Russia or right before he was sent to Russia, he went home and got a replacement because he was done. He fought in the Iberian Wars, and that changed him. I was trying to reread his memoirs before this, and I only got to like his trip to Germany. And there's this one scene that I distinctly remember when I was reading his stuff like 5 years ago. And he was with a friend fighting against the guerrilla warfare people. And one of his friends got killed. And he was seized by this just like this rage and this like craziness that just made him lose his mind. He just started like charging that guy and like slaughtered him. And he did not have a positive outlook on going to war. He was saying stuff like, I'm not going to see my homeland again, without hope of seeing my homeland. So he is one of the negative people I came across. So in my third chapter in my dissertation, that's where I talk about the soldiers. And most of the guys in here, it's them talking about how much they love Napoleon in different ways. And then different reasons for why they went to war. But there was one guy who didn't care about the Legion of Honor. Napoleon offered it to him, and he was like, nah, I want to see my fam.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
I'm Sandra, and I'm just the professional your small business was looking for. But you didn't hire me because you didn't use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has professionals you can't find anywhere else, including those who aren't actively looking for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role, like me.
In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you'll miss out on great candidates like Sandra. Start hiring professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
That's why I'll fight you. He was like, I don't need these special awards. I don't need your special social class. I just want to go home. So these are like the little negatives I found.
I mean, that's interesting because, as you say, the moment when you would expect, well, I don't know if that's true specifically of the French army, because you've got the Bourbon Restoration, so perhaps there is an inclination to criticize Napoleon in the years after Waterloo. But certainly, I mean, all I can base this on is my reading of the British sources, where because you have eventually a victory for Allied forces against France, the points where you see criticism are actually the sources that are contemporaneous to the events. So in the run-up to significant battles where troops are experiencing setbacks, that's the point where they really rail against their commanders, and the venom really starts to come out. But as I say, perhaps that's not particularly true of the French example, because you've got the glory days and then you've got the Bourbon Restoration. Do you think that's a factor?
Yeah, I don't know. My research kind of stopped right before the wars ended. I do know that France like super venerates Napoleon. They're obsessed with him. When I was doing this research and learning about all of his wars, I realized that all of the Paris metro stations are named after his battles. And then I've heard that Animal Farm by George Orwell in France changed the name of the pig from Napoleon to something else. Yeah.
Did they change it to Wellington by any chance, just to really kind of produce a little data?
Yeah, I don't know. That would be something to Google later. A French person told me this, and I thought that was hilarious. Yeah, that they changed the name. But
Absolutely.
even in New Orleans, I came across a street called Jenna. Yeah, because they have a Napoleon house in New Orleans that I went to. Had a great time there. They wanted Napoleon to escape to New Orleans, and they were super ready for him to get there. But he died before he could make it there. So New Orleans has like some Napoleon fascination as well.
Well, I suppose that goes back to Louisiana Purchases and all of that, doesn't it?
Yeah. Thanks, Napoleon. You gave us a lot of the country.
One of the main ways that Napoleon's word spread quite easily was through print. But you've mentioned about his oratorical ability. Did he tend to deliver speeches in person?
Oh yeah, he delivered speeches in person, probably when he was saying "Soldat." What was it? Je suis content de vous. Yeah, so he delivered speeches in person. He tried to talk to the soldiers in person a lot too. Go and be a man of the people, interact with them, tug on their earlobes. He would try and be all, I'm Superman of the people. So yes, he would deliver a lot of the speeches in person, and he made sure to show himself to the troops a lot. And there was this one soldier I had who like was obsessed with him, and he wrote something about just Napoleon walking past him, and he was like, oh my God, this guy, oh yes, so great. Yeah, so he had, just like being there really had an impression on a lot of his soldiers, especially Jean-Pierre Chauvin. He's an artillery soldier at Austerlitz, and he was always inspired by his presence. So he said, here, I found my quote. He was in attendance at the celebration for Napoleon's coronation anniversary at Austerlitz. We know Austerlitz was super awesome. That's when he said that speech. So I guess a lot of my good rhetoric comes from this. So he described in awe, le cri de vive l'empereur, mais le cri de, oh God, I don't know French numbers, 80 000 hommes se confondent dans une seule noise. So he's saying that the cries of vive l'empereur, they were the cries of 80,000 men, but it all came into one noise, one single noise. Something about one single flame. I don't know. Something was lit up and it turned into one single flame. So this guy was super responsive to Napoleon's presence, his speeches, just like his hero complex. Yeah.
I mean, you just kind of answered my next question, which was going to be, does this work
sorry.
with? No, that's fine. That's great. In terms of inspiring people, is there any sense, does the print work better than the speech in person? I mean, my sense, but I'm not an expert on this, would be that it's Napoleon's presence that really has the effect on people. Yes, he can put things in print, but actually being there and having that interpersonal connection, which he was so good with, was the thing that really tipped things. Is that borne out by your research?
Yeah, I think so, because the soldiers and stuff who I read about, they would talk about him, seeing him, etc., stuff like that. When I was looking at the bulletins and his other print things, it was more talking about the written word of it and how he would distribute it to other their territories and stuff like that. And when he's mad at the soldiers, he tells them, "Je ne suis content pas de vous." I am not happy with you. And he'll say all the positive stuff he says in the negative. So the way that he would scold them is the same way that he would praise them, which it's kind of like your parents saying, "I am so disappointed in you." And you're like, "No." Yeah, but there was this one guy who kind of cracked me up a bit. He was religious, and he was writing a letter to his dad telling him about how he substituted Napoleon for God. And I was like, okay, Napoleon equals God. This guy, Pierre-Jacques Rasquinet, an ordinary soldier of the Grande Armée, substituted Napoleon, Emperor of the French, with God. So you're saying in French, but I'll just try and say it in English. At this time, I'm abandoning whatever the translation in English is. I'm leaving God because I serve my emperor. But basically what he's saying is, yeah, you guys know I'm religious, but right now I'm a soldier and Napoleon is my God. And I will focus all of my energies on that, which I can understand. You need someone to believe in. Might as well be the guy who's leading you into battle and sending you places. So I thought that was interesting, though.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Napoleon never goes as far as to kind of, well, certainly as far as my reading of this period goes, he never kind of tries to replace God with himself, however high an opinion he may or may not have had of himself. It was interesting what you were saying about praise earlier as well, because one of the things that I was reading, I think it was from his time in Italy, was that people would start becoming almost kind of a little bit needy in terms of wanting his praise, to the point where he was very good at kind of withholding it from certain regiments in order to make them fight that much harder. I can't remember the name of the unit now, and it's going to bug me for ages. But there's a particular unit that writes to him saying, we were disappointed. I think it's the CEO who writes to him saying, we were disappointed that you didn't specifically praise us in your latest bulletin. And Napoleon writes back and says, "I'll bear what you said in mind, but on this occasion, you didn't do enough to impress me, and therefore you didn't merit the inclusion in the bulletin. But if you do impress me the next time we fight, I will." And they did. And so he followed through and did. So it's a really clever way of, I almost want to say, manipulating people to get the most out of them.
Yeah, that is manipulation 101. Gotta say though, it's impressive. I like it.
Another area of your research that is really interesting is the question of troop motivation, which you touched on a little bit earlier. To me, this is just an endlessly fascinating topic. I discussed it at length with Ed Koss back in June for Waterloo Remembered, when we were talking specifically really about British troops. What's your sense of what motivates soldiers during this period?
So what I found is that it was filial love. Felt when I was writing my conclusion, I felt kind of cheesy, being like, when Napoleon's tactics ran out, what always was there was love. It was love that motivated them, which is true. It was love for your country. It was love for your family. It was love for your friends. It was love for like the surreal life back home as a civilian that they had before. And obviously each person is different. So someone who doesn't have family, I'm sure they're going back for friends or for a lady or for a partner. Or maybe there were soldiers that joined because they preferred the life of a soldier rather than their occupation, but you know, they love their family. It's their family and stuff. So there's always going to be different reasons. But the like main connecting factor was love. Yeah. So yeah. Napoleon did motivate them and stuff. You know, you could say love for country, love for patriotism, love for Napoleon, love for my fellow soldier homies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying there, because in my opinion, I mean, there are a few good books that have been written on troop motivation in recent years. One of the best in relation to the French army is Michael Hughes's Forging Napoleon's Grande Armée, where he talks about the role of camaraderie, which is kind of what you're saying here about kind of, I mean, I would probably use the term loyalty to your comrades. You'd use the term love for your fellow, you know, brother in arms, as it were.
Yeah.
And Michael Hughes and others have all talked about kind of the role of that in preventing soldiers from abandoning their units. Do you see evidence of that in your research, or is there some kind of bigger stick that's keeping men with their units when they're on campaign?
The stuff that I was focused on was more like the family love, but I did see aspects of it. Like that one guy, my friend, I think of him as my friend, the memoir guy, Jean-Baptiste something, can't remember my friend's name. But when he watched his friend die in front of him and then flipped out, you can see it right there. I had something interesting in my dissertation that I saw, and I think I looked at this book by Rory Muir, M-U-I-R, talked about tactics and the square formation, and how like the square formation, part of it was not wanting to leave your brothers behind, because if one person broke, then everyone was screwed. So there's a bit of that there. But most of the stuff I read in the letters, it wasn't really talking about what was going on. It was kind of just like, hi, mom and dad, I'm good. Can you send me some money? I miss you. Send my love to everyone in our village, because that was usually how the whole village got news and stuff. And they would say things like, your loving and devoted son, blah, 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 blah. It was very formal. So there wasn't a lot of speaking about their comrades in arms. I'm sure that there is somewhere, because there's so many letters that have been published. You know Alan Forrest, the historian? He did this one book that was like a big part of my research, about the letters of the soldiers. which is at home in Seattle and makes me sad because that was a really solid book. So yeah, anyone who wants to read a book, Alan Forrest wrote one. I can't remember its name, but if you Google Alan Forrest, soldiers, Napoleon, book, letters, I don't know, then you could probably find it.
There you go. Top tip, some book by Alan Forrest. But in fairness,
yeah, because he's written a lot.
Exactly, yeah. But he is a very prolific and very well-regarded scholar of the Napoleonic era. So I completely agree with you in terms of recommending his stuff. I'm going to ask what sounds like a provocative question now, but it's not intended to be. I'm always struck that Napoleon made some pretty offhand comments about his men. So one that springs to mind is one night in Paris will replace them all. On another occasion, he talks about thinking nothing of losing 10,000 men if it achieved his aims. Do you think, for all of his interactions with people on a personal level, which he was great at, do you think that he actually valued his men's lives on an individual basis?
My answer is yes and no. Because I've been thinking about this, and I can't give you like a yes or a no. It's both. I think that he liked to think that he valued his men, but I think that also as a commander, he had to think of them as numbers. So I think it goes both ways. I feel like if you really like project this image of yourself as a man of the people, and you say stuff like "mes soldats sont mes enfants," my soldiers are my children, like you can't be completely cold behind the scenes. You know, you're saying stuff like this all the time, even if you don't think it at first. I feel like repetition, just like what he did to them, might actually affect him himself. So, but we don't know. He could have just been a cold, icy man behind the scenes, cold, calculating, logical, and not care about them at all. And I don't think we'll ever know. But so that's why my answer is yes and no. I have some quotes from him talking about how like his respect for the noble character of the French soldier and affection for his troops remained sincere, apparently, with a grain of salt. So from a military correspondence in 1796, so some of his earlier stuff, he said, "For I am certain that our victories are due to the bravery and daring of the men," giving them credits and being like, it was them. So he has confidence in his men. And then, so in this military correspondence featuring his departure from the Egyptian campaign in 1799. And so, by the way, these are all written in English because it's a translated book of his letters by some dude who speaks English. So it's not like word by word. There could have been something lost in translation. He said to the new head of command in Egypt, "The men I entrust to you are like children to me. They have always shown me, even in the times of the greatest hardship, proofs of their affection. Carry on this tradition. It is due both to my special regard and affection for you and to the genuine attachment I feel towards themselves." So that could have been a masterful political play to motivate his new head of command, or it could have been genuine. That is why my answer is yes or no. Yes and no.
See, it's interesting that you mentioned about, earlier letters, because I was going to ask, earlier examples, because I was going to ask, do these efforts to motivate men change over time? Because the French army obviously changes a heck of a lot during this period, from the army of Italy, obviously very poorly equipped, demoralized conscripts, to the more elite troops of the incredibly well-trained Grand Army of 1805, to a quasi-multinational force that he led into Russia in 1812. Okay, only a fifth of it is non-French, but still significant proportion. Do you see him changing his approach with these different forces?
I would be able to answer this if I had all of my research. Because I think a lot of the quotes in my dissertation that made it into there were from the time when he was most successful, and the non-French troops don't get mentioned very much in my dissertation for some reason. I'm not sure why. I think I was dealing with a lot of different topics. I think that definitely with the bulletins, you can see it, like the propaganda being like, hey guys, we won everything, even though we didn't. And everyone was really great, even though they're not. But I do wonder if he changed his whole the blood of the French soldier rhetoric to incorporate the non-French people. I do know, I have this quote somewhere about how he was able to win over the non-French soldiers pretty well, because he'd go and he'd talk to everyone. And this was written from one of the commanding officers or something. And he would go around talking to the soldiers, and the Italian ones and the other ones and stuff would warm up to him as well. So I would guess my answer is I'm not very sure.
That's fair enough. I mean, you can only work with the information that you have to hand, can't you? One final question. Yeah. What's the emotional legacy of the Napoleonic Wars for these men? Because they have to be rehabilitated into French society if they survived, of course. And we often question whether people like Ney had PTSD after the Russian campaign, but plenty more would have suffered in a similar way. So how do they transition back into civilian life, having devoted, in many cases, their youth to fighting for an empire that has fallen?
Yes. So I tried looking in the memoirs of my buddy Jean-Baptiste something or other before this call, and the memoirs end right after he leaves the army. And I was like, all right, cool. He's like, I'm going home, yay. And but I would reckon that he would not have an easy time of it, just like from reading his memoirs and seeing how honest he was about the struggles of war. My research did not extend towards these soldiers like after the war, because I don't know if there are primary sources as many readily available to talk about them after. But there was this one guy in my conclusion. His name is Jean Guillot, and in one of his letters to his parents, he discloses his changing mentality as a consequence of the environment of warfare that he existed in. And he's basically saying that war has changed him, and he's going to return home a completely different man. And he says something like, I might seem like a stranger born of a different mother and father, but I'm still your child. Like, please don't judge me. Like, please just be prepared. So I think that guy probably had some PTSD as well. So there's not like, it was the letters I read, it was all kind of like, I'm homesick, or give me money, or I miss you. And I talk about mal du pays, homesickness, for a bit somewhere in here. Severe form of homesickness, mal du pays, commonly caused soldiers to fall into a deep depression, and it was actually recognized by medical opinions as a serious and incapacitating illness. And so I think that the soldiers who suffered that probably had a rough going of it when they got home as well. Honestly, I think most soldiers would have a rough going of it. Most ordinary soldiers, the people who fought, like actually fought and stuff. And then, like that guy, Ney, who was like an officer, right? But, all that stuff with Russia. Yeah, it's a tough time, especially back then when you're fighting with swords and stuff. Probably see a lot more guts come out. I don't know, what's worse, guns or swords?
I mean, they all ultimately serve the same end, don't they? So
yeah, but if you're fighting sword to sword, the person's right in your face. So I wonder if it's like slightly worse for PTSD.
But that
like a little, not to say
no,
anything
I
about
know, absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, what strikes me is that I was talking to a colleague who works on drone warfare, and he was saying that actually you might think that people have this perception of drone warfare, pilots flying drones, you know, it's a bit like a computer game, it's not really real. But actually suicide rates are higher amongst drone pilots than they are amongst regular pilots. So that's an interesting one in terms of to what extent is that the case. But you're also talking about bloodier times, aren't you? You know, higher incidence of crime and so on. So it's the whole thing of the past being a foreign country.
Yeah, I also do wonder if, because I have this conversation with my boyfriend sometimes when we watch like historical shows, were people, this is the question we ponder, is were people tougher back then because life was harder? Like your children didn't survive all the time. You'd push out a bunch of babies and only like half of them would survive. People died so young, people were dying all the time. Depending on the time period or the country, you saw public executions a lot. So death was a lot more prevalent. Was life as meaningful as we hold it now? Did people have like a tougher skin? Also because mental illness wasn't really discussed. Like, yeah, so that's kind of my question that I don't know if anyone can actually answer, but that's kind of my question too about the PTSD is like, were these guys like really struggling? Were some of them able to just brush it off because they'd seen worse? Were some of them struggling so much, but because of the like mental health stuff just not existing, it was just a lot harder for them? Yeah, so I guess it would be interesting. It's kind of hard to say because who knows if there's enough sources left to look at that still exists today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there is a need for some kind of study that really digs into the nature of mental health during this period, because it must have been there. You know, this isn't a modern invention. Well, to the recognition of it is a modern development, but the nature of mental health illnesses is not something that's, you know, new or unique, whether it's a case of recognizing PTSD or shell shock or whatever it might be. The example that I always end up going back to, and people are probably bored of me mentioning this, is of some trial records from after Waterloo, where you've got soldiers who are found aimless, and the charge is found aimlessly wandering the countryside. In effect, it sounds like the classic shell shock PTSD thing, but they don't have that kind of conception. And there is a discussion about mental health amongst even the rank and file, to the extent that when people are tried for the desertion, their most common defense is to say that they were, quote, out of their mind, which is either a reference to the fact that they're off their, you know, they've got drunk, or that they're trying to put forward an insanity plea as a defense, which quite often backfires because you've got to be able to prove your insanity. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't, like you say, I don't know what the answer is in terms of were people tougher, inverted commas, back then. I mean, it's a very different environment. As you say, you would probably be more accustomed to death and more accustomed to hardship. So perhaps you would make less of it than we might do today. You just kind of accept it as part of your everyday existence.
Yeah. Probably that too. Yeah, it would be interesting if someone ever wrote a book. If you ever come across any studies or something, send it to me.
I will do, absolutely.
Yeah.
Malia, this has been great. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been fantastic talking to you.
Yeah, it's been super fun. I feel like my life really had purpose this week when I got to actually do something that I love again, history.
That was Malia Ogawa joining me to discuss Napoleon's means of motivating his men. A big thank you to everyone who continues to support the Napoleon Assist on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a patron, prices start from £1 a month, and just go to www.patreon.com/The Napoleonicist to find out more. You'll find that patrons get neat little perks, including their names in the credits. A big thank you to my mentioned in Dispatches patrons who, at the time of recording, are John Haynes, an anonymous Canadian, Rob Griffith, Alex Churchill, Brendan Teeling, Jamie Kingston, Anna Vakulenko, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Rory Muir, and James Bevan. Join me next time when I will be speaking to Rob Griffith about the forgotten rifleman of the 5th Battalion, 60th Regiment. Until then, I'm Zach White. This has been The Napoleonicist. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.
Want truly hydrated skin? Meet Osea's Body Care Breakthrough Hyaluronic Body Serum. It's clinically proven to increase hydration by 161%. It's lightweight, fast-absorbing, and delivers 24 hours of hydration for silky smooth skin without any sticky afterfeel. Treat your skin to clean, vegan skincare from Osea. Get 10% off your first order with code SUMMER at OseaMalibu.com. That's OSEA Malibu.com, code SUMMER.